All right, so we're in Acts 24. We will let me get all my stuff together here. I apologize. That is actually a picture of the amphitheater in Caesarea. We're going to talk here in a minute. We'll talk a little bit about Caesarea because it's kind of an interesting place. The background on all of my pictures are pictures of the ruins in Caesarea. So when we start chapter 24, and again, I tend to just go down through the chapter. If I miss something you want to talk about, stop me. We'll go back. I'll slow down. Chapter 24 starts with and after. So what are we talking about? What happened last week and the week prior? What was the and after? Mike?
Paul had been arrested when he went to Jerusalem to bring the funds for the Christians that were there.
Mm-hmm.
And the elders suggested that he take some of the people that were under vows and go to the temple and make people feel confident that he wasn't opposing Judaism.
Yep.
And while he was there, he was arrested. They put him in jail overnight and found out that there was a plot to kill him the next day.
Yep.
And they transferred him from Jerusalem to Caesarea.
Yeah. I put in my notes, basically, Paul was arrested for being Paul. His reputation had preceded him, and they assumed or decided that he was going to cause trouble, so they arrested him, decided to throw a riot, and things went downhill from there, as they usually would. So as 24 opens, he has been sent to Caesarea to see Felix, who is we would say, governor of Judea, sort of that area of Israel. I believe I have a map in here that shows that. Why was Felix in Caesarea? Does anyone know? This is a bit of a trick question, but not really. Caesarea was the capital.
The Roman capital.
Yes. Well, here, I'll show you this. I found this. Hopefully you can read this. Oh yeah, that showed up well. This was on a Jewish history site. Pretty much in every way, shape, and form, Caesarea was a nicer town than Jerusalem, especially if you were not a Jew. Caesarea was a lot cooler than Jerusalem. It was on the sea, so you had a nice breeze. It was very much a Roman city as opposed to Jerusalem. The only thing it didn't have was the temple and a lot of what they would think of as religious zealots. Okay? I did find a neat picture. This is the Hippodrome. Think Ben-Hur chariot races. That's what Herod built. I mean, this was a up-and-coming kind of, well, not up-and-coming. This was a cosmopolitan city, as opposed to, we would probably say, a very provincial Jerusalem. Okay. Now, enough geography. Here we go. So after Paul has been there 5 days, who shows up in Caesarea? Yeah, Ananias, the high priest, and some of the elders. These were the people who were accusing Paul. We would have said this is the prosecution, okay, for this trial. They bring with them a man named Tertullus, or Tertullus, however you say that, I didn't look it up. That is a Roman name. He would not have to have been a Roman. A lot of times they would use a Roman name because they thought it sounded more official, especially if you were before a governor or something. How does Tertullus begin his prosecution of Paul? Mark, you.
It was very political the way he did it, very aggrandizing almost,
Yeah.
I would describe it as.
Yeah. A handful of the commentaries I looked at talked a lot about the flattery and what is wrong with flattery, why we shouldn't do that. What a lot of them didn't mention was simply the fact that not only was it flattery, it was a bald-faced lie. The man was lying through his teeth. This is a little bit about Felix. This is the one I wasn't sure. Yeah, you can read that. He was a fairly awful individual. I think Corey mentioned last week Jonathan, who had been high priest for a short time. According to Josephus here in Antiquities, he believed Felix killed him, had him killed. So this was a fairly awful person. It is interesting because he says, since through you we enjoy much peace. Okay? Keep that in mind, and then if you go back in chapter 23, you're going to see that it took 472 soldiers to get Paul from Jerusalem to Caesarea safely. That doesn't sound like a land with much peace. So this was, again, Felix was a fairly awful human being. But once we get past all the lies and the flattery, what were their actual charges against Paul? What was it that Paul was charged with? Mark?
He was a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarene.
Okay, there was one of them. I think there were 4 total.
Stirs up riots.
He stirs up riots.
Profaned the temple.
He profaned the temple. And then what does he start with?
Did they say he brought Gentiles into the...
Yeah, he profaned the temple. Yeah,
Was that saying that?
yeah. He profaned the temple. He's a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. He started a riot. And then they start in Tortella starts in verse 5. He said they found this man what? A plague. Your version might say a pestilence or a pest. Does this remind you of anyone in the Old Testament who is referred to in somewhat the same way? I came across this and I thought, yeah, that's the same thing. Remember what Ahab called Elijah?
Troubler of Israel.
Yeah, you troubler of Israel. That's what they're saying here. Everywhere he shows up, he just messes stuff up. He is a plague and a pestilence. He is, let me see here. He stirs up riots, which it seems everywhere Paul went, there ended up being a riot, but I don't know that you can lay that at his fault. Yes, Julian.
Just something I found interesting. I don't think you mentioned it, that Tertullus is kind of mentioned really being like an attorney or advocate. You know, my New King James says orator.
Yeah.
But this shows you how far they've gone to try to get Paul convicted.
Yeah, they went to the trouble of hiring a professional speaker to show up before Felix. So they've gone, I guess you could say, that extra step. So they called him a plague. They says he stirs up riots. What is the purpose of calling him a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarene? What are they getting at there?
Well, Rome, they've been charged with being against the Roman government.
Yep.
This group of people.
Yep.
Unrest is never good for the provinces when
Mhm.
you're a Roman ruler. So he's basically saying he's a threat to you, Felix, because he's causing trouble in the region that you're going to have to put down, or you'll lose your job, and Rome will have to come put it down.
Think about the words he uses here. And this is something that is done even today by politicians and anyone else. Yes, Kimberly?
He kind of defaces the religion of Christianity
Yeah?
by calling it, like, I at least got the idea he's calling it a sect of Judaism.
Yeah.
That's causing a problem.
Yeah.
And so, like, kind of just totally steamrolls over the faith and beliefs of Christianity.
Yeah.
So that it isn't like
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
movement
Yeah.
that can have steam.
Sometimes we refer to people using what we call dog whistle words. He's a ringleader. Is being a ringleader ever good? Did we ever say someone is a ringleader of the local youth group? No, that's not the term we use. He was a ringleader. And not only a ringleader, he was a ringleader of a sect. Does sect ever sound good? No. It would be the same thing as if someone said, oh, you know Mark Newton, he's an elder over at that cult of Church of Christ in Jamestown. It's the same idea. There are certain words that put ideas in our mind that are negative. Sort of one of those you know what we mean kind of things. I think they were also counting on the fact that Felix knew nothing about this sect of the Nazarene, which they'll find out later they're wrong. But they're sort of trying to, they're trying to throw a little shade on him without saying it outright. Also, the idea of a Nazarene was the idea of sort of the wrong side of the tracks. Being from Nazareth was never considered a good thing. So they throw that in. And then they say he tried to profane the temple. Now this is interesting because what was it they had charged him with back in Jerusalem? In Jerusalem, they say he went ahead and did it. Here they say, well, he tried to. So they're backing their charges off a little bit because they know they can't prove anything. This is probably where you see maybe perhaps a professional speaker who knows a little bit of what he's doing. Don't say anything they can't disprove. So this is what they charge Paul with. How does he defend himself? Mark?
He goes right after, in fact, he goes right after the charges that they made.
Yep.
That I was here, I wasn't causing any trouble.
Mm-hmm.
I was not stirring anybody up. I was observing the law of my fathers.
Yeah. He starts out by saying, it's only been 12 days since I was there. First of all, there wasn't time for me to do everything that they say I did. You know, it's hard to start a revolution in 12 days. And you can go back and count. Paul was there 12 days in Jerusalem. Is the only time he spent there. So he says, I was only there 12 days. There weren't any disputing. Everything was fine in Jerusalem until they showed up, and we'll talk about who they is later. And they have no proof of anything they're saying. They didn't bring with them any proof. They brought a good speaker, but they didn't bring any proof. But he does confess to one thing. What is it that Paul confesses to?
The hope and resurrection that he said during his first trial.
Yep.
Of the hope and the resurrection of the dead, I am being called into question. And
Okay.
it divided the assembly, basically went into chaos.
This is interesting because this one I did a little bit of digging on, and most people, I found a handful of different thinking about what he said this. One guy made the point that Paul never failed to make a point of the resurrection anytime he could. Again, we talked about that a few weeks ago, the idea of the resurrection being a central theme. Remember when he was on the Areopagus and everything's going well until he starts talking about the resurrection? We talked about why he had to say that.
Well, another reason for mentioning it, it's going to cause an uproar between the two sects with the Pharisees and Sadducees.
That's the other thing That's the other thing that I found. It is possible that Paul gave Felix a little more credit than the Jews did. Remember, Annas would have been what? He would have been a Sadducee. You wonder if Paul is saying, I talked about the resurrection, which guess who doesn't believe in that? And one of the things I read, it said that even among pagans, the idea of some type of resurrection was fairly common at this time, which I thought I did not realize. I didn't know that. So it is possible that he was, kind of giving a wink and a nod at Felix and saying, all I did was talk about the resurrection, and guess who doesn't believe in that? That's why I'm here. Yes, Bob?
I also saw something, I don't think I picked up on this before, but you said that some believe there was a resurrection, but there were two resurrections, one for the dead, one for the living. I don't know if you mentioned
Yeah,
that.
no, I did not, but that's good.
But I think that's fascinating.
And this is also a point where, again, as you said, he mentions there will be a resurrection of both, and I'm going to probably quote it wrong. I think the King James says the just and the unjust. Is that the right? Which has nothing to do with what Paul was talking about, but is interesting with what you see in the world today. The idea of annihilation that Kyle talked about a few weeks ago. So he makes his defense. Let me see where I'm at. What does Paul say was his reason for everything he did? He gives a reason for why he does everything. What's it say at the beginning of 15? Yeah. He says, because of my hope in God, and then he ends it by saying, and because of the resurrection, I've done all these things. What would it look like if I, we, me, you, whoever, was better at living our whole life because of our hope in God? What would that look? What would that look like in a person? How would that maybe change? If everything we did was because of our hope in God.
We'd be a whole lot better people.
Yeah.
We'd be more studious with the word. We would set a better example. I mean, just your whole life would be enhanced.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't appear like Paul had a Sunday morning kind of Christianity, did he? Paul didn't go to church on Sunday morning and then live the rest of his life till next week. Everything he did was guided by who he was and what he believed. Corey has stood up here all last month and talked about the idea of fanatical Christianity. Christianity should be something that changes your entire life, not just where you go to church. And with Paul, it appears that it did. What does it say this hope caused him to do? In verse 16, what does it say it causes him to do?
To do his best to have a clear conscience before God and man.
Doing his best to have a clear conscience. When we talked a little bit, I don't know if it was last week or the week before, about the idea of conscience. Is a clean conscience important? Okay, why? Why would you say, if my conscience can't be my guide, and we would agree with that, right? I don't get to do whatever I want and say, well, I thought it was okay, it didn't bother me. If I can't do that, then why is it important to have a clean conscience? David?
Well, we need to educate our conscience, which is a lot of what we talked about last week and how important that is. But whether you have educated it or you have an uneducated conscience, if you are going against it, you're actively going out of your way to do something that you believe is not correct. Whether you're right or wrong about that, it isn't really the point in this example. But you're actively going against what you believe to be right. You can't possibly be correct then.
Yeah.
No matter if your conscience is right or is wrong.
Yeah.
You're definitely doing wrong.
Yeah. You get to that point where even if you're right, you're wrong. Yeah. So what is the point he's making to Felix about having a clean conscience? What do you think he's wanting Felix to get out of that? Bob?
Well, if you have, as David already indicated, a trained, a finely honed conscience, you'll do the right thing.
Yeah.
And he's trying to tell Felix, if he had a good conscience, he would do the right thing. And I'm not guilty of these accusations these men have made against me.
Yeah. I'm not what they're saying I am. Yeah. That's a fair way to say. Yes.
I think also, I could be wrong on this, but I mean, we've seen Paul Paul like humbled himself in order to teach others, and I kind of see this here like how he's being intentional about his faith. Like, you know, he's like, I believe what I do unapologetically, and that doesn't mean I'm perfect, but you know, it's like if I can do it, you can do it too.
That's a, yeah, oh, sorry, I interrupted you. No, that's a really good point. We have seen Paul, if you didn't hear, so we have seen Paul at times be very humble. You see Paul kind of standing up here for what he believes and saying unapologetically, this is who I am and this is what I believe. And there's probably a good lesson in that for us. There's times to humble ourselves. There's also times to stand up in front of people and say, this is what I believe.
Well, and talking about the resurrection and him believing in that, that's the basis for Jesus Christ being resurrected from the dead.
Yep.
That goes along with the teaching of the way.
Yep.
And really, I don't know if we mentioned it in verse 14, I mean, Paul says, I believe in all things written in the law and the prophets. And obviously the prophets talked about the Messiah and talked about Christ.
Yeah. Yeah, that could have also been a very subtle nod at the Sadducees, who obviously did not believe everything that was written in the law and prophets. Yes.
I wonder if he makes a point to say that he keeps his conscience clear before God and man, which I wonder if is part of the point that he's trying to make to Felix. Is that, you know, some people use their faith to justify breaking the law or doing the wrong thing according to other people. But he's pointing out that he's keeping his conscience clean on both sides.
That's a good point. Because the way they're trying to paint him is he's one of those people over there who is causing, you know, trouble. You think of, well, we think of Simon, who was a zealot, who was a Canaanite. They had no trouble killing people to free Jerusalem or to free Israel from the Romans. Paul's saying a bit of, that's not who I am, and that's not what we're about. Yeah, David?
Yeah, I mean, this part to me is the part of the trial where he's setting up who he is, his character, right? So before he gets into what they accused him of versus reality, what are the facts, he's first just establishing, I'm an honest person. What I am saying is the truth.
Yeah. I think that's good.
You know, it's interesting when we think about Paul. Paul, as he speaks of his former life, he says, I did that in clear conscience. I persecuted the church. I thought I was doing right. I did that. And we see that he has now honed his conscience to know all that was bad. And now he needs to go doing what's right according to God's word. And I think it's fascinating because I did that. I had a clear conscience. Now I know what's right. And I have a clear conscience towards the truth.
Which proves the point that we can't let our conscience simply be our guide. But yeah. Anything before we move on? So who really started all the trouble according to Paul?
Some Jews from Asia.
Jews from Asia showed up, and that's who started all the trouble. So where were they? I see a lot of heads shaking. Yeah, we don't know. Maybe stayed in Jerusalem, maybe they went back to Asia, whatever it was, they weren't here. There was no one here who could corroborate anything that these men had said about Paul. They sort of showed up, caused trouble, and left. So what's the one thing Paul said that he did say? And we've kind of talked a little bit about this already. I got ahead of myself. Yep. I have hope in the resurrection and the death of Christ. This is where, like I said, and again, I got ahead of myself talking about this. The idea that he was just stating the resurrection like he always did. Possibly it was the idea of, the only thing I did was say this, and you know why that annoyed them. You know, we don't really know. What did the accusers of Paul not count on? There's something that they hadn't counted on when they got there.
Felix being Felix.
Yeah, they hadn't.
Felix saw through this orator's
Yes.
speech.
Yes. How do we know? Yes, go ahead.
I'm gonna make the point. He said these Jews from Asia weren't there.
Yeah.
It was a big thing in Jewish law that you have the right to face your accusers.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the 10 Commandments was thou shalt not bear false witness. And here they're trying to get their case brought without any witnesses and without Paul having an opportunity to respond.
Yeah. Yeah. And we see that while Felix was a truly awful human being, he apparently wasn't stupid. We're told, what was it we are told that Felix had? He had something in,
Are you talking about what's coming up?
Yeah.
He had a Jewish wife.
well, no, but it says that he had
He
a,
had accurate information,
yes,
accurate knowledge of the way.
yeah, a more accurate knowledge of the way.
He understood it more than they would have anticipated. I
Yeah,
think.
yeah. I don't think he bought the ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. Okay? Now, what's interesting, and this is conjecture, what might have been why might Felix have had a more accurate knowledge of the way? Can you think of anybody we know of who would have been in Caesarea? There's a couple of people in the book of Acts we have seen that were in Caesarea. Somebody turn back to 21:8.
To look at the evangelist.
Yeah. In Acts 21:8, we're told that Philip was in Caesarea. Okay, so one of the apostles, it appears, ended up in Caesarea. On the next day we departed and came to Caesarea, and we entered the house of Philip the evangelist, who was one of the 7, and stayed with him. Sorry, I said apostles. He wasn't an apostle. So Philip was there. Also, do you remember anybody else that maybe Paul might have visited in Caesarea who was Roman? Cornelius was from Caesarea. So it appears there was a church, a community. There were Christians in Caesarea, some of whom were Roman. So it is possible. Oh, go ahead.
There was another source of knowledge that's not so apparent. That's his wife Drusilla.
Mm-hmm.
Her daddy was Herod Agrippa I, who was put to death in Acts 12.
Yep.
And her brother was Herod Agrippa II, who we're going to meet in the next chapter.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so they would have known a bit about Judaism, and when you look at Herod the Great, family of Herod had to do with John the Baptist and Jesus and all of this thing. They weren't ignorant of that.
Yeah. Yeah. So it appears as though these Jews that were accusing them were not aware, perhaps, or not familiar with the idea that Felix might have known a little bit of what was going on. Again, Felix was an awful human being. We're not told that he was dumb. Yes, Mark?
The other way he might have known, think about it, because of all the trouble, that, after James was beheaded and disciples went everywhere, there's every likelihood that other people were brought before him and accused of other things as well. And he may have had need to learn more about it because of these trials.
Yeah. Yeah, so he knew something. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, I mean, as the governor, I mean, we see throughout Acts, everywhere Paul goes, he's chased out of town by the Jews, and the Romans don't have a problem with it. There were lots of different religions throughout the Roman Empire. That was all fine. So it's likely he was aware of the Christians, the Christian sect, as he would have been looking at it here, but also aware that they weren't for revolution.
Yeah.
Like they were never instituting something he cared about from a Roman perspective of trying to overthrow the government or something. They just were peaceful and were talking. And it was the Jewish people who were constantly making an uproar.
Yeah. as a ruler, as a leader of an area, it paid to know what was going on. Yeah, Bob?
I was going to say, it just made me think, the Romans would have let the Jews and now the Christians do their thing as long as they didn't create problems. But that's one of the reasons why these men that have come to accuse Paul, they say he's a seditionist. He's going to do insurrection. He's going to rally these troops and they're going to go against Rome. You need to push this back before it gets carried away.
And remember, we're getting closer to the time when Rome is officially going to get fed up with the Jews. So it is, like you said, it's quite possible that Felix knows where the actual trouble is at here. Rome was very unique in that, as an empire, Rome really didn't care what you did as long as you paid your taxes and you didn't cause trouble. And among world empires throughout the past, that's kind of rare. Most people marched in and forced you to convert to whatever they worshipped. Rome didn't care who you worshipped. They just cared about your money and not causing trouble. And up until now, the Christians haven't caused trouble, and Jesus told them to pay their taxes. So Felix said, you know what, I'm going to wait until what? I'm going to wait until Lysias gets here. Which we didn't talk about this, but it is a little interesting when you look at their charges. Last week, Corey talked about the letter that Lysias wrote and how he kind of softened up the edges a little bit and made himself look better. Well, the Jews do the exact opposite and try to make Lysias out to be the bad guy, and we saved him to bring him here so you could have a real trial. They do kind of the opposite. Do we know if Lysias ever showed up? Doesn't seem like it. Most people think that means Felix never called for him, because if Felix called for him, he would have showed up. Either that or he showed up and didn't do anything afterwards. So, what did Felix decide? We're going to wait for Lysias to get here, but we got to do something in between then. So what's he going to do? Yeah, we're going to hold him, but did he throw him in the dungeon and put him in chains? Now, it looks a lot like house arrest. Now, we don't know for sure if that's what it was or not, but it was something to where he said, make sure his friends can come in. And again, we know there would have been some type of Christian community in Caesarea. So something akin to house arrest, something, I don't know what you would say, non-confining maybe, is what he does. And so Paul comes and talks to Felix. Felix sends for him. He brings his Jewish wife in, which I didn't put anything about her. She was an awful person too. I mean, as you know, well, when you're connected to the Herod family, that's kind of a given. She would have been at this time about 20 years old. She was known for being incredibly beautiful. She was married, but Felix decided he wanted her instead, and Felix had a better position, so she left and married him. Paul comes before Felix and Drusilla. What does he talk about? It says he talks about three things.
Righteousness, self-control, and the judgment that was coming.
Okay. Righteousness, self-control, and the judgment to come. So, what if the elders came to you and said, I want you to preach a sermon on righteousness, self-control, and the judgment to come. Or ladies, you've been tasked with teaching the ladies class, and this is your lesson. What are you going to say about those three things? What would you start? Where would you want to make sure you got across? Is there anything that immediately comes to mind when we talk about righteousness, self-control, and judgment?
One of the things you'd want to do is establish your authority for it. And so it's ultimately going to start with Christ.
Yep.
I mean, that has to be the first thing. This is what Jesus taught. This is how he established his church. This is why we do, what we study, and so on and so forth, so that you can get that basis of credibility. That's step one.
What does righteousness look like? Is there any righteousness outside of Christ?
No.
Go ahead.
When I think of righteousness, the first verse that comes to my mind is Psalms 119, 172. It says, all of God's commands are righteous.
What was that? Psalms 19?
119, 172.
119, 172. All of God's commands are righteous. Or righteousness, okay. So yeah, you're going to talk about righteousness. What about self-control? Maybe think about the audience here.
Yeah.
Go
I
ahead.
thought he might have been thinking like, preaching about self-control as in I'm not the one running around doing stupid stuff, like because of righteousness, because of what we believe, because of what we were taught. If we are required to have self-control, we're not running around being stupid, like we make the right choices,
Yeah.
and kind of some of those thoughts from
Yeah.
us.
Rita, did you have something? Or?
Well, I was just gonna say, Paul obviously tailored his lesson to fit his audience.
Yeah.
And those, you talked about how he came to have his wife. Well, a little self-control maybe is something that Felix needed to hear
Yeah.
about.
Yeah. Thomas?
Yeah, similar to Rita, I mean, it says Felix became afraid and then goes on to reply.
Yeah.
That leads me to believe that the righteousness, the self-control, and judgment would have been the thing.
Yeah.
that, Felix and his wife were doing that were contrary to God's word and almost, calling them out, which would have been a tough conversation.
Remember at this time, Felix did not become governor of Judea because the people elected him. The only person Felix had to keep happy was Caesar. Other than that, he could literally do whatever he wanted. Okay? If it didn't bother Caesar, if Caesar was okay with it, he could kill whoever he wanted. He could do anything. The only control over him was one man, almost 1,000 miles away. That was it. Does this sound like a person who maybe needed to hear a little bit about self-control? Yeah. Go ahead.
Felix, they said he's on his third marriage, and I just looked at some different translations of the word that was used, because the New King James says afraid.
Yeah.
The American Standard says terrified. English Standard Version is alarmed. And of course the King James says tremble.
Yeah. The bell just rang. Let's jump ahead to that. Is fear an appropriate response to hearing the gospel?
Sure.
Okay, I'm seeing people nod yes. Fear is an appropriate response to hearing the gospel. I guess that's why. Everyone's nodded their head and said, yeah, sure. Why is fear an appropriate response to hearing the gospel? Yes, yeah, go right ahead, I'm sorry.
Because, it causes conviction, and some people have a reason to feel that conviction.
Yeah, fear is a sign of conviction, and there are some people who have a reason to be scared. When you start talking about the judgment to come, yeah, that was real. That should scare some people. So why didn't it work? Why didn't it go any further than fear? Really?
He wanted to do what he was doing more than, the fear had an impact on him.
Yeah, that's exactly what I put down. There were other things that were more important to Felix. And when you think about it, I know many of you in here have people that you mention in your prayers over and over who need to come to Christ. Is it simply because other things are more important? Is that what it boils down to in the end, or am I missing something? Yeah. When it comes down to it, we have to decide what is more important. Bob?
One of the things, and we have examples of people we know in the same condition, but he had no right to Drusilla's wife.
Mm-hmm.
And if he truly was convicted and looked at that, what would he have to do?
Yeah.
He'd have to change that. And that's what repentance looks like.
Yeah.
And he wasn't prepared to do that because, as you said, she was beautiful or whatever. For whatever reason, he wanted to remain married to her.
Yep. Well, we talked earlier about everything Paul did being because of his hope in Christ and how that would change your life. Think how much it would have changed Felix's life. Felix would have had to make a lot of changes.
He would have lost it.
Yeah, and a lot of really hard changes. I mean, I don't know that we need to sugarcoat and pretend it would have been easy for him. Sometimes it's not easy for people. I mean, sin is awful and sometimes it gets people in a mess. I just lost what I was going to say. Let me check and make sure if I wrote it down. We'll go ahead. The bell's going to ring here in a minute. The last two verses, what does it appear was more important, or at least one of the things that was more important to Felix? Mark?
Money.
Money. He was hoping somebody would pay him off. Any idea why he might have thought that? We don't think of Christians as being rich in this time period. Why would he have thought, well, somebody might have given him money?
Right.
Think about what Paul was doing when he showed up in Jerusalem. Paul was bringing money to the saints in Jerusalem. It would have been, you're in the middle of a famine. All of a sudden, these Christians are eating. It wasn't a secret that these men showed up with money. Somewhere, they were getting money. Felix knew that. So he was waiting on someone, whether it be Paul or someone else, to show up and give him money.
It would be another thing you'd have to change if you became a Christian.
Yeah.
You'd have to quit extorting money from people.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was part of the reason why Roman rulers were so expensive. Or so, not expensive, so wealthy. Besides what they were paid, again, if it didn't bother Caesar, you could do it. You know, if the Roman tax was 10% and you wanted to raise it to 25 and keep the 15, who cared? You were in charge. That was our second bell. I will give someone the last thought if they have it. Mike?
It notices it's 2 years that he was kept there.
Mm-hmm.
We know from historical things that he was procurator of that area from 52 to 60, so we're 20 years past the resurrection of Jesus.
Yeah.
58.
Yeah. Yeah, you're getting closer and closer to 70 when things are going to really get, I guess, interesting might be the way to say it in that part of the world. So yes. Well, thank you all for your help this morning. I'm not sure who has next week. Okay, someone has next week and we'll stand up here.